That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about The Brutalist, the third film directed by Brady Corbet, which premiered in competition at the 2024 Venice Film Festival, where Mr. Corbet won Best Director for his efforts. A24 is releasing it December 20th, 2024.
Do I know his other films?
Well, you know him as an actor.
Okay.
Who's in Mysterious Skin, Funny Games US, Simon Killer. If you've never seen that, I highly recommend. Previously, he directed The Childhood of a Leader with Robert Pattinson and Bernice Bejo, which I really liked. Also, his 2018 follow-up, Vox Lux, you have seen.
Oh, yeah.
Starring Natalie Portman and Raffey Cassidy, who pops up in this film as well.
What is The Brutalist about? When visionary architect László Toth and his wife Erzsébet flee post-war Europe in 1947 to rebuild their legacy and witness the birth of modern America, their lives are changed forever by a mysterious and wealthy client. What's your pull quote?
With his third narrative feature, Corbet reminds us of cinema's colossal possibilities, crafting an impressive, complex saga about a compromised American dream, reflecting how a journey, no matter how pleasant or intolerable, is a negligible condition of the destination.
Mine. It's easy to joke that The Brutalist refers to the runtime. All jokes aside, Corbet's epic saga is masterfully constructed with pitch-perfect performances from Brody and Pearce. This was very impressive.
Yeah.
It's long as hell, though.
It's 3 hours and 35 minutes. There's a built-in 15-minute intermission.
So that's already a challenge for me. However, I was captivated by the story.
But that is kind of how cinema used to be as a grand spectacle in the Hollywood, in the golden era. You know, it's recalling David Lean, Francis Ford Coppola, Orson Welles, or for more contemporary comparison, I would say Paul Thomas Anderson.
Although you did talk about on our Patreon, you watched some Japanese films, and you talked about how their approach to cinema.
Well, like wartime constraints.
Sure.
Like talking about Kurosawa's first film, but yeah.
But again, this was quite the journey.
Yes. It's I mean, you don't really see anything like this anymore.
Can you talk about The Fountainhead?
In preparation for this, because I knew that Corbet, by the way, I've been talking about this man for a long time, and I just learned that is how you say his surname. Yes, I read Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead
in preparation
because I knew it's not based on that, but inspired by, in that set in earlier decades, and really drives home Ms. Rand's ideas about collectivism versus individualism, and her theory of objectivism. But there are elements there that I think if you had read that ahead of time, that might add some nice accents. But in short, it's about an architect who, despite the cultural constraints about him, is fixated on building something that is not only beautiful but functional, which is, I think you'd agree, kind of at the core of what is going on here.
Okay, I'm going to try to tell the basic story. So there's an intermission. So the first 100 minutes are set from
1947 to 52, I believe.
Okay, so we focus on Adrien Brody playing László Toth, and he is a Hungarian-born Jewish person who lives in Budapest. And we see that he has fled the concentration camps to come to the United States.
After liberation.
After liberation. And he was unable to bring his wife and niece with him.
Because they were at a different camp.
Right. So he ends up in Philadelphia, and his cousin Attila is going to help him.
Played by Alessandro Nivola.
And Attila gets him a job in his furniture store, and that's where they meet Guy Pearce. Guy Pearce is this very wealthy man, and they've been tasked with building a library for Guy Pearce, whose character's name is
Harrison Lee Van Buren.
Mr. Van Buren. This library is a surprise to him. So when he finds out, he blows up, fires Attila and Adrien Brody's character.
László.
Which we'll get into specifics, but it kind of ruins László's relationship with his cousin. So now Adrien Brody is out here on his own. We did see, though, that he met, or when he first came to Philadelphia, he met a friend.
Gordon, played by the great Isaac de Bancolet.
So they remain friends, and now, some years after he's stopped working for his cousin, he and his friend are shoveling coal when one day Guy Pearce just shows up, talking about, oh, I want to talk to you, László. Let me take you to lunch. And they're sitting at a diner, and that's when Guy Pearce's character apologizes, saying that, you know, I overreacted. It was a really bad day for me. I had come back early from a trip because my mother's really sick. So I blew up on you and I shouldn't have. And I did a little research on you. And number one, I love the library you made for me, which it is spectacular. But also, I didn't realize you were like a big deal in Eastern Europe. And he's showing him all these, Guy Pearce is showing Adrien Brody pictures of Adrien Brody's work.
His brutalist architecture.
And that's what the title refers to, his style of architecture, which is like Teutonic and very minimalist. And Adrien Brody starts crying because he's like, I didn't know there were pictures of my work. And there's even like a magazine featuring him and his work. And Guy Pearce says, I'm so sorry. First off, because he never got paid. And Guy Pearce insists, like, I did not say don't pay you. I didn't find out till recently. So here's the money I owe you. And I want to invite you to my home again to see your work. So Adrien Brody agrees, goes over there, and it's like a social event. And the purpose of the event is that Guy Pearce is announcing that he wants to build this huge, I mean, he says like community center, but it's much more than that.
An institute.
In the small suburb they live in outside of Philadelphia that overlooks the town, and he wants Adrien Brody to design it. At the same time, one of Guy Pearce's lawyers, who we're told also works for like the vice president, is helping Adrien's character get his wife and niece to the United States. And the wife is played by
Erzsébet?
Felicity Jones.
Yeah.
Yep. So they are successful in getting them over. And that's when the first part ends. So we get a little intermission. And in the second part, we start the groundbreaking of the center, which is named after Guy Pearce's dead mother.
Was her name Margaret?
Margaret, yes.
Margaret Lee Van Buren Institute for Children Who Can't Read Good.
And difficult people. But groundbreaking starts, and then we have an incident occur because the train that was carrying all of the supplies crashes, like it derails. And Guy Pearce just throws his hands up. Like,
well, because it's two men are badly injured, and if they die, this will like tarnish the legacy of the
everything.
Institute.
So Guy Pearce literally just says like, well, everyone, like, I'm letting everyone go. We're done. Like, we're done. Thankfully, though, during the time when the wife, Felicity Jones, shows up, Guy Pearce really likes her. And it turns out she's even more educated than her husband. She studied at Oxford. She has an English degree. She's a talented writer. She speaks perfect English. So Guy Pearce gets her a job in New York as a writer. So after the situation in Philadelphia, or the center dies down or evaporates, Adrien Brody and his wife are now in New York City. And he works as a draftsman for an architecture firm, and she works as a writer. They have a really nice life. Her niece, played by
Raffey Cassidy from Vox Lux.
She has gotten married. She's pregnant. So it seems like everything's going really well. Zsófia, that's her name. When one day, that damn lawyer shows up at Adrien Brody's job, talking about, oh, Guy Pearce wants to restart the center. In fact, he's in Italy right now, trying to secure that marble you wanted. So the Italy trip is very important because Adrien goes to meet Guy Pearce, and it's there that, and we have to talk more about this, but Guy Pearce sexually assaults Adrien Brody. Partially because Adrien Brody is vulnerable because he's a full-on crackhead.
Oh, well, addicted to heroin. Hop.
He says that he was given heroin because on the boat ride over to the United States, he injured his face. And so he was given heroin for the pain and then got addicted. He and his good friend.
Gordon.
Although Gordon got off the stuff. But in that sort of vulnerable moment, Adrien Brody's assaulted by Guy Pearce. But he moves on. They get the marble. They build the institute almost completely. When one day, Felicity Jones' character, she's in a wheelchair.
Yeah, she's developed osteoporosis that might be reversible.
And due to the malnourishment she endured in the concentration camps. So we can elaborate more, but she at one night is in a lot of pain from her condition and she's out of her pain meds. So Adrien Brody goes into his stash of heroin and shoots her ass up, which actually causes her to OD.
They have a very nice couples moment though before that happens.
They have a very uncomfortable sex scene to me, and then she ends up in the hospital overdosing. We can talk about the sex
uncomfortable
scenes.
To us, but it seemed like it was nice for them.
Sure, but in the hospital, now that she's recovering, she tells Adrien Brody, "Do you remember what you told me while we were like high as a kite?" And you can tell in his face, he's like, And then the next scene is her walking into Guy Pearce's mansion, like with a walker. Mm-hmm. So it seems like she's doing better than she was before. And in front of Guy Pearce, his two children who are twins, a boy and a girl. I mean, they're adults.
Joe Alwyn and Stacey Martin. Mm-hmm.
And a bunch of business associates. She interrupts dinner and she says, your father, Guy Pearce, raped my husband. And that causes chaos. Mm-hmm. The business associates are like, we are not staying here, bye. And the son, you've never seen this. He gets up and snatches that lady from her walker and drags her to the front door.
Oh yeah, it's a gasp worthy for sure.
It's shocking.
And how it's shot is really well done.
It is. Mm-hmm. And then now they can't find Guy Pearce. So now there's a search party looking for him. And then segment 2 ends without us really knowing what happened to him, but you do hear someone in the background say, oh, I think I found something. I assumed that he had killed himself.
I think that's a safe assumption to make, but...
So then the epilogue...
Set in 1980 in Venice at the first Architecture Biennale.
That's right. We see a retrospective of Adrien Brody's work. So László Toth, in a wheelchair, with some crazy-ass old man makeup, is being wheeled in by his
niece,
who
is played by Raffey Cassidy,
and his
niece, now played by Ariane Labed, who's the wife of Yorgos Lanthimos.
Oh, she is?
Very notable actress and director herself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's actually a very nice cameo to have at the end.
Well, she gives Adrien Brody's acceptance speech. And the main thing we learn from that is, because talking about the inspiration for his designs and his ethos, but the main thing we learn is that Margaret Lee Van Buren Center for the Blind in Doylestown, the design was based on the concentration camp he was in.
That he and his wife were in, yeah. Is it Buchenwald and Dachau?
Which is pretty major, right?
Well, because we spend a majority of the film where László is having to defend his designs to the community and these other designers that have their own opinions.
Well, all of the conflict, because there's a lot of conflict between Adrien Brody and like other people working on the project, because he has very specific thoughts about measurements of rooms and the height of the ceilings. And we don't learn till the very end that it's because he wanted those rooms to be the same size as the concentration camps he was in. So, you know, obviously a very powerful message at the very end, but that's it.
And I really love the closing statements. Labed's last comment, which was meant to be reflected in my poll quote, was that, speaking about her uncle, it's not the journey, it is the destination.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the most powerful message I got after finishing the film, is like how amazing life can be to really, I mean, the pendulum swung in the most extremes.
Oh yeah.
And he had sort of resigned himself, like after he gets into it with his cousin and loses his job at the furniture store. And now this like very accomplished architect is now shoveling coal, and he seemed fine with it.
Well, what can you do except take one day at a time? But I really like that, you know, for some people in this country, like you're looking at the American dream from the other side, the inverse image, and the institute that he designs, he has made like these twin towers that form the shape of a cross, and at midday every day, the sun shines through on the altar, but all the shots we see of that cross on the altar of it being upside down.
Yeah. Yeah. So what did I like? I'm assuming it didn't have the biggest budget, and I know that it took a long time to put together.
It didn't, no, yeah.
And it looks so good. It's so well crafted.
It was shot by Lowell Crawley, who's worked with Brady Corbet before, and also on some very weird projects like Dow, which I loved, and Andrew Haig's 45 Years. But I don't know if you remember Vox Lux, but the opening moments are very similar with the very well-designed credit sequence over vehicles traveling on the road.
Oh, yeah. I will say, though, we saw Brady Corbet introduce the film.
And we didn't even bring up his wife, his spouse, Mona Fastvold, who's a director herself. I love The World to Come, which she directed. She co-wrote this with him.
But he kind of shaded the screening room because he said that
he did.
The film, like he shot it in 70 millimeter.
How it's intended to see.
How it's intended to be seen, and this room is not accommodating that we're watching a copy of a copy. So he seems a little persnickety, but I feel like that really speaks to the level of detail
exactly
in this film. So, I'm sure he's a beast to work with, but his product was very impressive.
And I mean, it did feel different seeing it in 70 millimeter in Venice.
Oh, that's right, because you did see it.
Because this is the second time I've seen it, but I think you still get the gist of it. But he invited people that were there to see it again when it plays appropriately.
That's a part-time job. I don't know about that. But so, just so well put together. Adrien Brody gives an award-worthy performance.
Which is also impressive considering he's won an Oscar for playing a Holocaust survivor in The Pianist. And this is a completely different kind of role, but I don't know, he's very intense, but he has these moments that when he sees the pictures of his work, he has such levels of emotionality that I think are really impressive.
He does, yeah, he does. But I love also how he's so calm at moments where you think he'd get upset. And then towards the end, when he starts to become more panicked about the project, he is upset. So there's quite the range. But I think Guy Pearce is my favorite.
Guy Pearce is very funny in this.
He's playing this...
Well, he's a monster.
But he has moments where he seems like, he's not that bad, but then he reminds you that he is that bad.
Oh, because he's if you cross him at all, and if you irritate him at all, he just flies off the handle.
Well, he seems mercurial, and then he also says things like he can read people, and he's just a little off the wall, and he's very put together. So I actually read his character as being gay because we find out that he has 2 children, twins, from a lady who he explains
he's closest to his dead mother, and he's like, once mother and the twins were here, I had no time for her.
So he didn't need this lady except to have some kids, and he's a full mama's boy, very put together, almost a little prissy.
Very, yes.
And then kind of the way he's interacting with Adrien Brody at first, after he makes up with him, I kind of got those vibes. I also got the vibes from László, Adrien Brody's character, and Gordon.
Well, they have an intimacy that's, I think, born out of shared trauma.
And they're also shooting up together.
Yes, and things feel good then, don't they?
And then the writing is just...
The writing's pretty impeccable.
Yeah. So, aside from the runtime, which it's not worthy of the runtime, it's just a long time to sit. Sure,
but if you think back to past celebrated films like Gone with the Wind and that have this it has an overture that has this fantastic score by Daniel Blumberg that's very magisterial, and then I think pops up at all the right times because I thought it did the enhancements that a score like that should do quite effectively, and there's just not that level of craftsmanship across such an ambitious scale.
So the characters, the wife, I think she wasn't my favorite.
Yeah, you had a problem with Felicity Jones, but I didn't mind her. I thought she was very empathetic.
Okay.
You didn't?
I don't know. Something about that way that wig was sitting on her. I don't know. There was something about her that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but then I have to remind myself the trauma they've been through, the journey to get to where they are. The fact that she has a lot of insecurity about her physical condition. The first night that they're reunited and they're in bed together, Adrien Brody and Felicity Jones, she's wanting to be sexual with him. And that's also where I was getting sort of is Adrien Brody gay? Because when he first gets to the U.S., he immediately, as soon as he gets off that bus, he goes to a whorehouse
with his friend.
with his friend, and we see him and his friend having sex with two prostitutes, and Adrien Brody's character doesn't seem to be into it. And when they leave, the lady even says like, well, we have boys here if you want, and he's like, no, I don't want that. So it was leading me to think that maybe that's part of what's going on, and the fact that he doesn't want to have sex with his wife. But then I also feel like just so much has changed.
Yes, well, it's
And maybe she reminds him of a past that he doesn't...
that he can't really return to.
Right.
There's so much baggage.
So the writing in the story, I think, is great.
Yes, and then he says he doesn't want to hurt her, and then they do something sexual, but there's like tears and crying, and like, you know, she's like, could you please say something kind to me? And he says, I love you, you cow.
Then their niece, who we find out is the daughter of Adrien Brody's sister, who died from an illness.
Who has elective mutism.
Yeah, the niece is mute. And then...
that's who we're interested. She's the first opening shot of the film is her, where she's being interrogated by authorities.
That's right. And so maybe, you know, assuming the trauma is what caused her to be mute, because she maybe saw that people who spoke, bad things happened. And then we see that once they move to New York City and she's pregnant and married, she does speak. So things seem better for her. And then she moves off to Israel.
There's a very curious scene between her and Joe Alwyn that I assumed he
assaulted her sexually. Yeah. Well, let's talk about Joe Alwyn.
Very good.
I thought he was the perfect, like sort of loser son of a rich man who's trying to be like his dad.
Just a dick and trying so hard to emulate his dad.
Yeah, but the performance is excellent. And so he's the one who hires Adrien Brody and his cousin, but didn't plan very well.
No.
Because he's like, oh, you have a week, my dad will return on Friday. Well, the dad returned like on Wednesday, so that's how he came upon this unwanted construction. And then Guy Pearce says, my son should know better.
I don't like surprises.
Then to be like, surprise me. But yeah, he gave a really good performance.
Stacey Martin doesn't have as much to do. She's also in Childhood of a Leader. Corbet's
well, of the three family members, she seems like the most kind.
Yes, the most humane for sure.
So I liked her.
Well, she's the only one that helps in that dragging scene where Felicity's carried away by Joe Alwyn and her shoes are off. She's the only one that helps her.
And I do think that the actor playing Gordon,
Isaac de Bancolet,
it's a quiet performance, but I thought he was so perfect in this movie.
Oh, he's been good since the beginning. If you haven't seen Claire Denis' Chocolat, I also really like him in Jim Jarmusch's Limits of Control, or his pair of films he did with Andrew Dosunmu, particularly Mother of George. He's always a very striking screen presence.
So one scene that kind of shocked me and didn't quite make sense to me is the scene where Guy Pearce assaults Adrien Brody sexually. Because they're in Rome, Italy. They have just secured the marble for the center, and they're at a party. And they're dancing and having a good old time, and then we see Adrien Brody's wandered off. So Guy Pearce is looking for him like, hey, it's getting late, we got to get up, there's a room ready for us. And he happens upon Adrien Brody in a corner, all high.
Vomiting,
like sick. And immediately, Guy Pearce gets on the ground, pulls down Adrien Brody's pants, unzips his, appears to sodomize him for like 30 seconds, and then he's finished. And while he's doing that, he's saying basically saying this is your punishment for... This is your
behavior means you're a loser and you deserve this, basically.
And I don't know. Maybe I'm a little salty about it because the physicality of it didn't quite make sense to me, but also for a movie that's so long to kind of not give us a better glimpse of why this happened this way, frustrated me a bit.
Sure, but they're both kind of emotionally impenetrable in a way that they're men that are clearly not dealing with the various issues they both have.
True.
But it also helped me read Guy Pearce's kind of like a Roy Cohn character who's gay but refuses to admit that he is because gay people are weak in his mind.
Yes, I think you're right. And so the themes of all of it make sense to me. I just think the actual scene...
Sure, but it's...
had a gay man been consulted? I don't know. Well, I don't know. I mean, people who are assaulting someone brutally, they're not concerned about being gentle, or that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying that it just seems like he just came upon him, and so like he was instantly erect and instantly slid in there and like I just.
Yeah, but it's not about pleasure. Like that.
No, it's
that
not.
kind of act is about power and control and degradation, and that a person like that is putting him in his place. Because I think he's saying that to Adrien, to László, as he's doing that. Like, who do you think you are?
No, and a person might correct me and say, well, actually, it was intended to not even be penetration. It was just to embarrass him. And so there wasn't the actual act. And so if that's the case, then that makes sense too.
Well, when they wake up in the morning, Harrison Lee Van Buren is quick to gaslight him.
Sure.
You were messed up last night. You know, you didn't really know what was happening, right?
I just think that was a really big moment that felt kind of like out of the, like I was like shell shocked a little bit, but not in the way that, like in a way that didn't quite work for me.
But to me, that's how predators work.
Yes, you're right.
I'm not trying to like defend this terrible scene, but
No. You're right. I just think that maybe it should have been a little longer, maybe.
Or there's more evidence. The other thing is, even closeted men that think that they're slick, you can usually tell.
Because it is a big moment, because Felicity Jones announcing what Guy Pearce did at dinner is what causes him to flee, maybe commit suicide, and it's the end of the movie before the epilogue.
Right.
So it is a big thing that happens that I just wish there were. Even if that scene stayed the same, I wish maybe there were another moment where Guy Pearce and Adrien Brody had an interaction where he acknowledged it, or I don't know.
I just think in that time and place between men, I don't know if they had the emotional capacity, either of them, to do that.
Yeah, but for him to run off of the accusation of this lady, and then we don't even know how Adrien Brody felt about it. I mean, clearly he felt something because he told his wife.
Right.
So he knew it happened. So there is some acknowledgement. I was a little shocked that that's all we got before. It's just like, oh, he ran off because of this accusation.
Well, did you notice during the build-up when she just says that he is a rapist at first.
And then they think...
And then Stacey Martin's like, what did you do to Ms. Toth or Mrs. Toth? And she goes, it wasn't me. And
my
then
husband.
That's when, you know, and I think, again, in this time and place, for a person of Harrison Lee Van Buren's stature to be accused of that, just accused of it, is ruinous.
You're right. Yeah. So I'm just trying to announce why I'm not giving this 5 out of 5.
But he ran out of that house like Damien Chazelle on the Oscar stage when Moonlight.
Oh.
If you remember that footage.
Yes.
Like, but yes, again, there is, you know, potentially room for improvement.
What else would you like to say about The Brutalist?
I don't know. It's just very impressive, and and even seeing it twice. And I will say that I think the first part is my favorite.
For sure.
I prefer that over that, and it's not because of Felicity Jones. I just think there's such an intense build up to this moment, and then the rest of it is, you know, kind of the misery of life, and a lot of stops and starts and frustrations. But
what would you give The Brutalist?
And it opened my eye to things like this style of architecture, because after seeing this the first time, I saw the Almodovar film, The Room Next Door, in the palatial estate those two women are in. I was like, oh, that's brutalist architecture. I would give Corbet's Brutalist 4 out of 5.
I thought it was excellent. I would give it 4 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.